I'm Tony Pellegrino, and it is September 28th. Thanks for joining me. This is part of a live tech talk that we do every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm grateful for everybody being here and hope everybody's doing well. We are here to talk about my favorite subject and yours, Jeeping, and how to build your Jeep, answer any questions that you have. In fact, we welcome your questions and comments. Let's see what we got here. Please include, you just type it into the comment section, and Debbie's here to read those. I've also got Jamie and Alex here to help me today. So type those in and we'll be happy to get to those. Our featured product today is our corner guards. So we've just revised our JK corner guards, and I will go ahead and we've also got a picture of them there. So you might be familiar with these. One of the things we changed was this radius. I wanted to blend the rest of the radiuses, and of course, you know, this has got our recessed taillight, but we're also doing this now blank. So you'll be able to order those. It's a lower cost. Putting this in is very expensive. So you'll now see a lower cost. I'll probably add those tomorrow on our website, but I just wanted to let you know we made this change and we are in production of these things. So if you want some, call in and you can get them. All right. So that's the latest on our JK corner guards. We're still working on the JL ones. They're coming along, but they are after the cage. So please be patient on that. All right. So today is the next part in our terminology series. So we're going to talk about lockers. And I don't know, Deb, do I need to give people more time to get on, or?
We've got a few folks on so far: Clint Lamoureux, Peter Doolin, Tommy Dykstra, Esther Parrott-Newcomb, Dylan Morkey, Kelly Sims,
Nice.
Sam Walker, Bobby Belomi, Jeff Barnard, Rick Harrington, Dennis Sargent, Cord Killinger,
Wow.
Michael
Nice.
Abdullah, Anthony Paquette.
Awesome.
We got our regulars, and it looks like we got some new folks with us today.
Cool. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys realize we're doing this on YouTube and Facebook Live. So for those folks that aren't all fired up on social media, YouTube's now their option. So pretty good one. For the folks that are watching that are some of my regulars, I know that you guys are pretty well versed in terminology. However, please pay attention, because it's one of those things where maybe by reviewing this again, you'll be able to better talk to somebody newer without talking over their head. So that's the whole idea here, is to make everybody that is into Jeeping familiar with the terminology, so nobody's talking over their head, and they can be as into it and as inspired as you guys are. So, all right, lockers. We know that they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, so to speak. So not only do they come in different forms for, you know, a Dana 44 or a Ford 9-inch or a 60 or a Rock Jock, because those would all be different specifications. Not only that, but now we've got, so this is a Detroit locker. So that's a particular style of locker. Then we've got the True Track. That's another, True Track's here, sorry. Positrack, which has some clutches, and then the Detroit. And then here on the bench, this is the newest generation, which would be what a lot of people are calling an e-locker or electric locker. This particular one is from Auburn. This is the one we run. So this would be 40 spline rear, 35 spline front. So this is called their Select-A-Lock. And this is very powerful. It's built to a military spec. So if you ever decide you want to upgrade, this is an excellent choice. All right. So when it comes to lockers, let's talk about the different styles. So the True Track is going to provide you some traction from both wheels in some various form, more than a regular differential, right? Because a differential is going to let one tire slip. The Positrack has clutches. So what it does is one tire can spin, but when it builds up a certain amount of heat or resistance, then the clutches kick in and it makes the tire grip. The downside with this one is that it requires some speed of the slipping tire for the other tire to catch up and then go. When you're rock crawling, that can be really dangerous. It can spit you off your line, or if that tire abruptly grabs, it's going to snap something in the axle train. So if you're not familiar, this is the middle of your differential, and your axle shafts would then plug in to each side of this thing. So, and then that goes out to your wheels, right? So this is an internal component. Most people never ever see this. But of course, anybody who's off-roading knows that you need lockers. So, and then of course, this is one of my favorites, the Detroit. This takes a quarter turn of the drive shaft to lock this thing, okay? So in forward or reverse, they're very reliable, and that's a great option, but it is not selectable, okay? So if you live in snow or ice, you're gonna need one of these other options, or go into something like this, the E-Locker, or even an ARB. So, and those are what we call selectable, which means you can turn it on and off when you want, where these all come on based on your foot, okay? Oh, Deb's got questions, go for it.
Brett Behrens, I've heard people say their lunchbox lockers make like a slamming noise when they release. Is that a normal characteristic of a lunchbox locker?
A lunchbox locker is very similar to the Detroit, where it's what they call a hard locker. And the mechanism inside there has got these teeth that are, jamming together based on the force, right, of your drive line. So what happens is when you let off or you turn, the teeth don't quite disengage, and then all of a sudden they go bam as they get loose. It sounds like somebody's back there whacking on your frame with a hammer. And it can be, the Detroit can also do that since they have the same kind of mechanism. And where these other lockers are going to be quiet, even an electric or an ARB is going to be quiet. So the lunchbox locker, just remember, that is a temporary solution. That is not a permanent solution. The components are tiny. We had one in here. I was going to see if do you still have one over there? It was in a small box. We'll see if we can find it here. But the components are very, very small. So it is not a permanent solution. What other questions you got, Deb?
Adam Fowles, are there any updates on the Auburn 14 bolt locker?
So that's going to look just like this one that I've got here on the bench. I have not gotten an update on that lately. I just was corresponding with some of the folks back at the Auburn factory. And sorry, I forgot to ask about that. So maybe I can get an update and even after this show, post where that's at in the scheme of things. I know, obviously with a lot of factories struggling with getting people to come to work, they were greatly affected, their whole production process. So I am going to assume that it's slowed down their ability to develop that, but I'll get an update and we'll see what we got. What else you got?
Off-topic question, VB Tom, weight, related to weight, 06 LJR and a 91 YJ. Is there enough weight difference to benefit going with aluminum fender versus steel?
Oh yeah. So if you, even on an older Jeep, YJ, TJ, LJ, if you switch everything from steel to aluminum, it's a 400-pound difference. On a JK, it's a 600-pound difference. Guys, we're talking about a lot of weight. It's the equivalent of 1 or 2 people or 3 people in your Jeep, depending on how big your people are. But yeah, it's a lot of weight, and it's all up high. So you want to make sure that if you're gonna add weight, it's got to be in components like this or axles where you need the weight and the strength. So yeah, good question.
Semron Ostrowski. Hi, Tony, Debbie, and GenRight Off-Road. Tony, can you please talk about the possibility of running a Detroit locker with the JK and JL transmissions? I've heard that the automatic transmissions have issues with the Detroits.
No, actually, it should be seamless, especially in an automatic. So, the reason why people originally didn't like Detroits was because they had a manual transmission. So every time you push in the clutch, the drive shaft relaxes, the locker turns off, and then when you let out the clutch, it re-engages and it tends to kind of make the vehicle jerk. And what that jerking comes from is all the slack in the rubber bushings and everything to then drive your vehicle forward. So the more Johnny joints and stuff that you have, that aren't rubber, then that's going to help not do that. Now, an automatic never lets pressure off the drive shaft, so you virtually don't feel the effects of the Detroit locker. And it works great. That's, I had that in the Terremoto for a long time. I raced it in the race car for a long time. And you just don't have to think about your locker. You just step on the gas and go. The downside, like I said before, is ice and snow. So, because sometimes you don't want both tires locked up like that, or that thing's going to make you do donuts. Now, sometimes that's fun. So you just got to decide what you're looking for. Jamie's laughing over here because he likes to do donuts. He did one of the pits once. What else you got?
Johnny Messias, my apologies if I mispronounced that. When people say they welded their axles as a locker solution, what do they weld?
So that's what we call a Lincoln locker, because they used to take old electric Lincoln arc welder, and the little gears are inside here. So basically, your differential has an opening like this, but you don't see springs, you just see little gears. Well, they just get in the window and they just weld everything together. They spin it over and they weld the other side so that none of the little differential gears turn. That is better than some of the small lunchbox locker kits. However, it is fully locked. Like, you got a spool. So every corner you go around, it's going to be chirping the tires. But, it is, you're locked up for sure. I did also, while we've got this picture of the locker up here, I wanted to show everybody this is where the ring gear goes, right there on this face. In fact, this might be the one that fits this. Yeah, it is. So, except I'm smashing the wires. So this is how, the gear assembly starts to work, right? And then you've got your pinion gear that would be coming off this way. So just to kind of give because I know a lot of people never get to see this assembly outside. And obviously, in your differential, it's tipped up like this, right? So, and then your pinion would be coming off like so. So I just want to make sure that everybody can understand how all that works. All right.
A few more questions, Tone. BKTJ, many people like to go with lights before they get lockers. I assume so they can see where they get stuck. Any other ideas why they would do that?
So here's what I can tell you. To go night wheeling when you are the least experienced is not a good idea. I don't recommend that at all. I recommend you get your butt out of bed early when the sun comes up, wheel all the daylight hours, and then sit by the campfire and relax. That's the best idea. Out there at night, when you don't know much and you got these bright lights that are overexposing your eyes.
And no lockers.
And no lockers and no experience is a bad idea. So, yeah, I know there's a lot of jokes and stuff about that on the internet, but no, you definitely need Look, lockers are as significant, or it's probably one of the most significant things you can do on your Jeep. I mean, everybody talks about going bigger tires or more lift. Lockers completely, like, if you've never driven with lockers, you have no idea, like, how good it is. And it really, really changes the game. It keeps you on your line. It doesn't abuse the driveline components, because keep in mind, when you don't have lockers, only half your drive lines are working, half the front, half the rear. So you're making every component in there work really hard. When you have lockers, now all the components are working together and it's a lot less stress on everything. And I don't know why that's so hard for people to get. You know, you paid for a four-wheel drive, you might as well use it, and you know, anyways, that's how I feel. What else?
Ken Brandt, so why does ARB set up their wiring harness so when you install both front and rear, you have to turn the rear on before the front?
Okay, so that is a little bit of a safety. It wasn't always like that. That happened in more recent years. They must have had some product liability issue. There is a go around for that. You can find it on the internet, but keep in mind, that's usually for somebody that's got an Atlas, where they've only got front drive and they're on bigger axles, so they're running a giant, you know, differential where it can handle front locker only so that you can do a dig, and that's a bit more advanced. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Martin Castillo Barrios.
Okay.
Barrios. Hi Tony, I have a 95 YJ with a Dana 30 high pinion with air locker and a Ford 88 in the rear, no locker.
Okay.
Should I even think of using the front locker, 35-inch tires, 4-liter engine?
Okay, so I'm glad you included the rest of the information because that was going to be my next question, was what size tire are we talking about? So your Dana 30 with a 35, assuming maybe you've got some upgraded axle shafts. Remember, the YJ was one of the few that came with a high pinion from the factory. So that's a huge plus. And although the Dana 30 is tiny, you know, you're talking about, you know, keep in mind the ring gear fits inside this ring gear, okay? So that's how much smaller it is. It is high pinion, which means it's pulling on the right side of the gear, on all the right side of the teeth. So you'd probably be fine now. I would not lead foot it. I would not bounce that thing. You need to be super smooth. And don't spin the tires, because the moment the tires hook up, you're gonna snap something. And by the way, if you haven't heard it before, I want everybody to hear this. When you break something in your axle, the rest of it is junk, okay? So if you broke the one side axle, or you broke the locker, or you broke the ring and pinion, the rest of it got shock loaded in the process, because it sounds like a firecracker going off when that happens, right? Well, that shock load goes through everything. Now, those parts that are left that aren't broken are okay as spares, but I would not run those as your primaries. Those need to go, or they're going to leave you stranded sometime on the trail. Okay, what else you got?
This is just slightly off topic. It's related to what you were talking about last Thursday. Yep. Jay McKenzie, 2019 JL Sahara with a Dana 44 axle swap, running 2.5-inch AEV dual sport lift. My front drive shaft angle is maxed out at ride height with caster angle about 7 degrees. I'm starting to do harder trails and trying to decide between getting a new front drive shaft or new axle shafts front and rear. What's your advice?
So you need to get rid of the factory shafts, and you've got to convert over to like a 1350 U-joint. JE Reel makes a great setup, and sometimes depending on the angle, you know, it'll include what they call a CV or a double cardan, and versus the factory drive shafts, which are thin wall. They can be very strong until you hit them, and when they break, they're done. And if the little rubber boot that's on there rips, then all the grease falls out. And certainly if you're doing harder stuff, you're more likely to get into it. These kinds of traditional drive shafts are really tough. You can beat on them. It's what we run in our KOH race car. And yeah, this is an upgrade that needs to be on your short list, front and rear. Okay.
He added that he's running 37-inch ridge grapplers.
Yeah. So here's the rule of thumb. If you go over an 1 3/4 puck lift from stock, you need drive shafts. You need brake lines. You're going to need steering. Okay. None of the factory stuff is set up to go beyond an 1 3/4. Okay, so if anybody listening is over that and you haven't upgraded all that stuff, that needs to be on your very short list. Okay? What else we got? Okay, what do you got, James?
Someone asked electric or air lockers, and then there was another question, would you recommend the selectable in the rear and Detroit in the front, or vice versa?
So that's two questions. So the first was electric or air, okay? And there's a couple different arguments here. So the electric obviously just requires running a small wire, a couple of small wires, right? That's much easier than an air line. When you do the air, that also means you need to add a compressor, and that's got a little manifold with some solenoids on it that are what activate the air running to and from. So the air locker is electric and air, because all the solenoids are electrically actuated, and then that triggers the locker. ARBs have been around for a long time. Yukon sells what they call the zip locker, also air actuated. They've, you know, I'll be honest, they're pretty dialed. They've been around a long time, and they're well refined. The electric locker is, you know, they've really gotten that. It's kind of been the newer thing over the last, say, 5-6 years. And a lot of us have run them at the hammers, and that's why the market is starting to feel more confident with these, because they've been put through the paces by guys like us. Okay, so the second part of that question was, if you can choose a selectable, do you want it in the front or do you want it in the rear? This answer is going to vary based on who you ask, okay? So what I'm going to tell you is this. I think the selectable should be in the front, because what happens is when you get to a turn, if you can't turn off that locker, then it's going to just push through the turn because it's a spool. It's locked up, okay? Now a Detroit has a feature where all you have to do is lift. Remember I told you, if the drive shaft gets a little slack, it unlocks and then you can turn. But you have to know how to drive that, right? It takes a little bit of throttle control to surge a little bit, and it'll get the locker to lock and unlock. So it depends. Typically what I do is, if you're gonna go air or electric, you do them both. You know, and now, by the way, you gotta pay attention, because you gotta have these lockers on before you get to the obstacle, okay? You do not wanna get on the obstacle and engage them. Everything's under pressure, it's too late. If it was my son doing the same thing, I'd say back up, get all the driveline relaxed, turn on the lockers, and then go. But you do not turn them on in the middle of an obstacle. So you're just asking for trouble. And if you do that with stock lockers, they are not going to last long, and they're going to be blown up, mark my words. All right, what else you got?
Corey Lone Wolf Picard added, also if you have a manual and you do a body lift, the shifter needs to be modified because it will no longer go into the lower gears.
Correct.
Such as second, fourth, sixth, and reverse. The shifter will hit the tunnel.
Yes. And there's also, depending on like a TJ and an LJ, you actually have to, there's a relocation bracket to move the transfer case shifter linkage. Because when you move the body up, now it doesn't reach the transfer case anymore. So anytime you do a body lift, and body lifts, by the way, like a 1-inch, 1 1/4 body lift on a TJ, YJ, CJ, fine, okay? LJ in there too. We don't do them on JKs or JLs. That's an older Jeep thing that had a much more narrow frame. And it gave you the ability to push the driveline up and do a flat belly. I don't want to get too far off where we're at, but yeah, so definitely things to think about as you do those. Great mention there.
Caleb Abbott, Tony, since Razipa joints don't lose strength under articulation, are you going to make some high quality ones at any point to replace U joints?
So I think what he's talking about is the RCVs, maybe. These, you know, obviously these are super high quality, 300M. You know, this is really, really nice stuff. They're well known for their, you know, orange boot. And we run these typically on the axles, right? So this is a front axle, you know, your outer knuckle, steering knuckle. However, on cars like Jordan's race car, he's running this style even on his drive shaft. So depending on what you're doing and how much you want to spend, these are a lot more expensive than the old traditional style. So just keep that in mind, okay? More questions, Deb, or keep moving?
Go ahead and keep going.
Okay, so I want to thank Curry. We borrowed this picture from them off their website, very helpful. But I want to remind everybody, you know, the main brands of locker, Yukon, Eaton, which is Detroit, and their locker, and Auburn are the main ones that you probably want to think about when you're looking for a locker. Okay, so everybody talks about, you know, bigger axle shafts, more splines. What does that mean? You know, here's again, off the Curry website. So a 30 spline axle, which is what you'd find in a stock Dana 44, would be 1.3 inches in diameter. Okay, so that's just over 1.25 inches. When you go to a 60, now you're talking about a 40 spline, which is now also in their 70, and that's 1.7, so that's almost 1.75 inches, 250% greater torque and capacity handling. So these shafts take a tremendous beating. This is why I was talking about you want, if you have four-wheel drive, you want to use it and you want to have your lockers on, because these little splines, believe it or not, are the only thing holding it together, right? You're talking about, you know, the end of an axle like this, right? So this is somebody's axle shaft, and there's the splines. They're not very big. Are you able to zoom in on that? And these slip inside your locker. So, you know, that's it. And, you know, these are like the size of a thread on a bolt, right? You know how easy that strips. So I just want to give you an idea. When you're spinning tires and it hooks up, this is what's holding it all right here.
When you have that much rotating mass.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, on a 40-inch tire, Jamie was just mentioning, you know, that's a 150-pound flywheel spinning, and you're hanging all that on this. So I just wanted to, you know, I'm trying to put some perspective to some of this stuff so that you guys can see the size difference, okay? All right, any questions on this, Deb or James?
James, do you have any YouTube questions?
Thanks for the water, by the way, James.
You're welcome. You need more?
Probably.
I've got
Okay,
okay.
Deb.
Go ahead.
Okay. I've got another from Martin Castillo Barrios.
Okay.
I have another question. My 95 YJ has an NV 3550 with NP 231.
Yep.
Rear drive shaft with CV and a slip yoke eliminator.
Eliminator, good.
And it vibrates only when accelerating in third gear. What could it be?
So that has to do with some of his joints in his control arms might be a little sloppy. So what I would do is put somebody else in your Jeep, standing just next to it, but where you can see underneath, have them just like go 2 inches forward and 2 inches back. And what'll happen is you'll see the whole rear end rock, okay? Now, if the rear end doesn't rock, that's good news, okay? That means all of your bushings that hold the rear suspension in are in good condition. Then what might be happening is your transmission mount could be worn or broken. And the other thing that actually, we've got a pinion angle thing coming up, but what happens with a short drive shaft like this, right? So the CV is going to be running at an angle like this. Your pinion needs to be dead straight. So I don't care if the transfer case is way up here, then the nose of the pinion's got to be pointed at the output of the transfer case. And when I say the output, that means it's going to look something like this, right? It's going to be a yoke, all right? And the pinion's got to point directly at this surface right here, okay? And that's how you set up a rear CV drive shaft. So just think about that, check that, and if all that matches, then let me know and I can help you. But that's a good setup. What he's got is a good setup. He'll be able to wheel that for years. Okay. Anything on splines? No, I'm gonna go past then.
Okay.
All right. So the next is understanding not only the shaft size between a Dana 60 and a Dana 44. By the way, this also applies to like 9-inch stuff. But the bearing size. So you can see there's a lot more meat here, and it takes a much bigger bearing on the inside here than these do. Okay, so even though the wheel flange is similar in size, the bearings are much larger, and that gives you a greater capacity not only to carry a load, which means if you're rock crawling, twisting it up or jumping or whatever you might be doing, the 60 is going to be a much more hardy axle. Now this is also what we call a semi-float axle, okay, where the lugs, each lug nut is or lug stud is pressed into this, okay? So then your brake rotor and your wheel would go right on the end of this. Completely different than a full float, which is what we're going to get to next. Can I go on, or we got questions?
I've got one slightly off-topic question.
Okay.
You want to take that right now?
Sure.
Semyon Ostrovsky, Tony, how do you determine which gear ratio to pick for an Atlas 2-speed? 2017 JKU Supercharge with 5.13s on tons, currently with a Rubicon T case, mostly trail riding and rock crawling. I keep going back and forth between 3.8-1 and 3-1.
Okay. Then I'm going to go to the next slide because I think that's what's coming. Oh, not quite.
No, it's the last slide.
Oh, it's the last slide. Okay. So a couple of things. If you find that you're going from low range back to high range, then you might be a good candidate for what I would describe as a 3-1. That's mostly what we run. That's what I run in the race car. That's what I run in Terremoto, is a 3-1 case. Keep in mind, a stock NP231 or 241 that like he was talking about is 2.72. So some of the race guys with big engines will go 2-1. But 3-1 seems to be a happy medium. So just figure that out. Remember, when you're in low range, regardless of what gear your transmission is, the fastest you can go by the book is 25 miles an hour, okay? Or you're spinning the little gears inside the transfer case too fast, and they're gonna burn up, okay? All right, so we talked about this a second ago. We talked about U-joints, a U-joint style axle. This one happens to be broken. I guess it was the only picture we could find. We do have a U-joint out here. So in a bigger, like a 60, this is a CTM U-joint, I think. So this is this is CTM. So this is what would be in a front axle. These are big, right? And these require greasing on a regular basis versus this style, which also requires grease. They put a little grease port in the end, so it makes it very easy to grease. And these also turn a little bit sharper. You typically get 5 or 10 degrees more turning out of one of these. So a lot of people find that is a very popular advantage by going with the RCV. So the RCV is going to come as a complete new assembly. So, and typically they're either 4340 or 300M shafts, okay? So RCV is a slick unit, and obviously you can see it's nicely sealed and looks really good. So great upgrade if you're looking to do something like that. Okay. All right. Next thing. Right now, if you've got a stock vehicle, it's not going to have locking hubs. Right? The locking hubs is something that you get when you go to aftermarket axles or 1-tons. This happens to be the Yukon, quick one, but the Warn is very similar. So But the locking hub is just like your selectable locker. It gives you the ability to get out and turn it and lock it or unlock it. The advantage of that is that only the hub spins then. So the whole front drive line, all the axle shafts and the drive shaft are not spinning while you're going down the road. So a lot less wear and tear on the whole vehicle. And this is a really nice way to go. And the only way you can do it is when you move up an axle. So it is going to require different wheels. So just be prepared for that if this is something you want. So just keep that in mind. Okay? Any questions right now, or we're doing okay?
Scott Pierce said that you need to do a tummy tuck video on the LJ.
On the LJ, okay. I can definitely do that.
So it's a tech talk idea.
Okay, yeah, because that's going to involve our BKT 1050, our transmission cross member. So we put that in to hold everything up so you can take the belly up and down for service. If you haven't seen that, that's definitely something you need. So, oh, Alex found some hubs. What'd you find? Ah, some Warns, perfect. Oh boy, yeah, there's a lot of parts in there. Yep. So this is the physical bad boy of what we're showing you on the shelf there. So the idea is that you turn this handle, and when you rotate this, it engages a set of gears and then locks up the front hub. So these are super handy. They're easy to replace, and typically this little centerpiece right here, it's actually held in with one small bolt right here, but this little piece they call the fuse. So if you were to break something, instead of breaking an axle, it typically breaks this little piece, which is easy to replace and cheap. Replacing an axle on a trail is not an easy thing, so anything you can do to avoid that is a good deal. All right, so let's turn this back. Well, maybe not. We're going to leave that. Okay. Let's see. What do we got next? Are more questions right now, Deb?
No, I'm replying to somebody.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about tooth contact. So many times we talk about changing the gears in your axles. So the factory selects teeth or gear ratios in your axles for two reasons. One is it has the proper amount of teeth engaged at one time. Two is to give you good mileage on the highway based on the tires that your Jeep came with. Okay, so the moment you start switching the tires, then it changes the RPM range of the motor, which takes it out of its optimal mileage and performance range, okay? So that's why everybody talks about changing the gears. Now, different gears have these sections here are where the bearings sit, so the pinion lengths are different. You start getting all kinds of different, depending on the gear set you have. So whether it's a Ford 88 or a Dana 60 or a Dana 44, all of the ring and pinions look slightly different. And then there's what they call the thick set and then a thin set. So you can see how there's like a completely separate section from the teeth versus this one here. So all of those make up the difference in how heavy duty a gear is. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you can only get thick or thin set based on the carrier you chose because the way that they're machined is completely different, right? So here's one, that's an all billet unit, and this is probably for something smaller, like a Dana 44. And so you can see that the carrier is completely different size than this one for the 60 right next to it. So it just depends on what it's going into and how heavy duty a unit is. So when it comes to the teeth, you can see like on this one, the teeth are spiraled. What that does is it keeps more teeth in contact with the ring gear at one time. So many times, if you've watched this show before, you've heard me say, like if you take a Dana 30 and you go to a 456, you've got two teeth in contact on the ring gear. If you go to a 488, you have one tooth. So because the ring gear is so small, you're just working with smaller teeth right? It's not always about the diameter, but it's also how much meat's there. So I'm merely just trying to give you guys the concept of, part of the reason going with this bigger axle is you get a lot bigger gears, right? These are much more substantial, and that's obviously going to hold up better. Okay. Any questions, Jamie or Debbie, on that stuff?
Got any, James? Brandon Grayhata, 2001 TJ 4.0 with Dana 30 front, Curry 9-inch Centurion housing rear end.
Nice.
Can that rear end handle a 37-inch tire?
Yeah, 37 will be fine on a 9-inch. And 9-inch is kind of an interesting character. We talked about it on the last show. The 9-inch, on the pinion, there's a little pilot bearing sticking off here. So they support the pinion on this side, where Dana only supports it on this side. So a lot of people like the 9-inch because it's got that. It's the same reason people like the 14-bolt. It has that same pinion support there as well. So, the downside with the 9-inch is the low pinion is lower and the high pinion is higher. So that sometimes that gets into the way of other things, or rocks on the ground if you're choosing the low pinion. So, all right. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. All right, so this is the slide we're going to talk about that shows you the difference between a full float and what they call the semi-float axle. Okay, so the semi-float shafts were the ones I was showing you a little while ago, where there's a bearing here, and then the hub of the axle with your wheel on it is floating out here. Okay, and if you're lucky, you've got a 44 that has this little retainer that when you break an axle, the thing doesn't just walk out and fall on the ground. This is an example of a full float hub. So what happens is, if you look here, the hub is this piece on the outside, and the hub rides on the bearings, which is completely independent of the axle shaft. So the whole thing, if the axle shaft breaks, it doesn't matter. The wheel stays there on the bearings, and it's the reason a lot of people like that. And in fact, this shaft that we have right here from Yukon is a typical, like 60 or 14 bolt axle shaft that would slide in right there and bolt on. So yeah, that's a good example. And then the kind we run, instead of having this flange on the end, there would be additional splines right here, and there's a drive dog that hooks in there. And but again, all the full float hub. So any questions on that, Deb or Jim?
Brandon Grayhata had an add-on to his previous question.
Okay.
He had the 01 TJ
Sure.
4.0. He said, is a Curry Dana 44 front axle a good match for his Jeep?
He was the one with the Curry 9-inch in the rear.
Yeah.
Yeah, a 9-inch and a 44 are very comparable, and a 44 front, make sure if you're going to go through the change that you get a high pinion 44 front. And what you prefer is 60 outers if you can afford that. If you can't, then do the 44 outers and get the beefiest stuff you can. But yeah, and by the way, Reed offers really high quality knuckles for a 44. And that's a great way to go. It's I think they're cast or forged chromoly, so they're substantially higher quality. And if you got to buy knuckles anyways, spend a little more money and get the Reed knuckles. They're the orange ones. You always see them. They're orange. Okay.
I have a few questions off.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Go for it.
Have you ever seen a CV break?
I have. You can break anything, first off. It depends on how hard you are and how big of a tire you have. So, I've seen where a sticky compound 40 gets into a hole, so the rocks have a bite on it, like more than halfway around. And man, if you pop the clutch, something's got to give. So you can blow up a U-joint or a CV pretty easily. So Yeah, nothing's bulletproof, but obviously all of these are serious upgrades from what you have. You know, if you were to take stock stuff, you know, on a trip, on a trail like the Rubicon, where you're loaded down with camping gear and you're going through there, you could break something real easy. So, you know, a lot of people just want to upgrade from there, so at least they know they'll get off the trail without breaking. So, completely different when you're loaded down. You know, you add 600-700 pounds of camping gear, and then remember, I just told you, you know, if you've outfitted your Jeep, right, with bumpers and winch and armor and stuff, you know, bigger tires, wheels, you know, you can add thousands of pounds to your Jeep. So now, you know, you've put camping gear in there, you virtually doubled the weight of your vehicle. So, you know, you're asking the components to work twice as hard. So just think about that, right? So that means you need to get twice as beefy of components. All right.
Okay, second question. 2016 JK with junkyard 1 tons and 40s. Currently running 538 gears. I'm considering a 383 stroker swap. Will I need to re-gear?
No. So the question was, he's got a 16 JK with 1 tons and 538s. Does he need to re-gear? No. The reason why is you do the gearing based on the tire. Okay, so he's got a 40-inch tire. 40-inch tire takes 538s, period. Okay. Next question.
That's all I got.
Deb?
Terry Witt, will wheel spacers have any negative effects if you run these axles?
Yeah, wheel spacers additionally push out the load or leverage, right? What do you do if you got to take a lug nut off? You get a longer bar to take it off? Well, you're doing the same thing on your axle. So more offset wheel spacers, all that stuff, if your tire sticks out further than where it did, you're leveraging it, and that's more wear and tear on the ball joints, the bearings, the axle shafts, everything. So, yeah, I mean, you know, again, a wheel spacer is like a lunchbox locker. It's a temporary solution, okay? So just keep that in mind. What else you got, Deb?
Do any of you speak Spanish? Can either of you
Interpret.
translate?
Taco Bell?
What? No. Okay. I'll try and run that through the translator.
Or maybe Val can do it if she's on. She's
Okay.
pretty good with that stuff.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, Dow Williams 2005 LJ 4.0 long arm, Dana 60 rear. Benefits or concerns with full width 79 high pinion Dana 44 front with locking hubs, chromoly shafts, and ARB.
That sounds like a nice setup for up to a 37-inch tire. Okay. If you're going to go past that, you're pushing your luck, but up to a 37, you're fine.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I happen to have a hub. Here's one of the full float hubs that you know, would come on a Curry axle. So that's what it looks like, and it's beefy. You know, the bearings go inside here, and that's a nice unit right there. So yeah, if you're thinking about that, that's a good way to go. All right, I'm going to skip to the next slide here. Okay, so now we're on the driveline one for the guy that had the pinion angle question or vibration, right? So, you know, when you bought your Jeep, or if you look under a stock Jeep, the drive shaft is going to go perfectly flat. They're not actually like kicked or anything. They're flat, and that gives you the lowest amount of strain and no vibration. That's the perfect way to run them. Once you start to do a lift, you're going to get moderate strain and moderate vibration, right? Then you can see here that, remember how I was telling you what you want to do is point the thing straight at the pinion? Well, when you don't have a CV, you can't do it with regular U-joints. That's why we're telling you need to go over to the double cardan style U-joint, right? And obviously, you know, if you do this setup, it's going to vibrate like crazy. You won't go very fast before you know it, and if you do, it'll come apart. So just keep that in mind, okay? I'm going to keep going. All right, here's the gear ratio chart. I know this is a popular one, and James, I think we have this on our Tech Talk page.
I think it is on there.
Okay, so if you're not familiar with our website, if you go to company, drop down, I think it's the first one, says Tech Talk. And we've got, there's a whole bunch of PDF files that you can view or download and print them out. But this happens to be the gear ratio one. So what's cool about this is it tells you the tire size, right? So you look here and you go, well, 40. You zip right out here to 538, and it's the green one, which tells you it's the most ideal. If you've got a 37, you zip out here, goes to 513, most ideal. 35, you can do 456 or 488. The reason we're giving you two choices here in gears is if you have a newer Jeep that has a really deep, some of them have 2 overdrives, then you want to go with the bigger gear ratio, the higher ratio. Because what it's going to do is it's going to let it stay in that overdrive, so it's not constantly bouncing out of that. So that's the idea behind what we're doing here. But you can see it goes all the way down to, like a 30-inch tire where you can run a 373 or a 411. 411 would be stock in a Rubicon. So, and you can see even with a 31-inch tire, 411 is still fine, and a 33-inch tire, 411 is the bare minimum. Okay, so kind of good for reference, and yeah, great little chart. So, any questions on this, Deb?
Not on the chart, but we're nearing the end of our hour,
geez,
and I
we
have
have
a
5
few
minutes.
more questions. Can I
What's
pop?
next? Oh, that's it. Okay, so
Can
we
I
do good.
pop
Oh,
them
yeah.
in?
Yeah, give me some questions.
Jamie Kenzie, how do you feel about the FAD system on the JL? Seems to act somewhat like a locking hub. However, concerned it's a liability having it in the axle tube. What would you recommend? Would you recommend a FAD delete?
Okay, if you're not familiar with this, on the long side of the passenger side front axle, it's a 2-piece axle. And by the way, Jeep did this many years ago in the YJ, and it was vacuum operated. So when you shifted into 4-wheel drive, it had this little fork that moved over this beefy gear and locked the 2 axles together. The JL is the same. So I've never seen one of those fail other than it doesn't activate. Right? And if it doesn't activate, you do not have 4-wheel drive, okay? So, look, if I was gonna buy new shafts, I'd buy a 1-piece shaft, okay? They have a little plate that you can take out the mechanism and bolt this thing in and it locks it. But now, just realize that when you go down the road, your entire front drive line is spinning. So unless you've had problems with that, I'd leave it alone. Or if you're going to buy new shafts, then I'd get a 1-piece shaft. But other than that, just keep in mind the moment you mess with that whole drive line. So both axle shafts, the gears, the drive shaft, everything's spinning from then on out. Okay. What else you got, Deb?
Heiko Papas, 2005 LJ TJ Rubicon 44s. Does GenRight sell a bolt-on double shear type steering setup, or can you direct me to someone who does?
We do. So you got a couple of options. The best thing for you to do would be to call in, but I'll give you the details. So we sell a chromoly high steer kit with 5/8 bolts. We sell another one with 3/4, but 5/8 is the biggest you can go on a Dana 44 knuckle. And you can build it if you're willing to spend the money to get the reed knuckles, you can do the double shear. But otherwise, single shear on a 44 is okay with the big 5/8 bolts that are grade 8 or F911, right? They've got to be top quality bolts. And we've run those for years, and it's been great. You're going to be running Heims, so you're getting rid of the taper and the whole ball joint end stuff. So all that's gone, and that'll work great for you. But to get some assistance on that, call in, talk to one of my guys, and they'll be able to help you select the right thing and or the high steer knuckle, okay?
VB Tom, at what point do you need a full float axle, YJ, LJ?
That has to do with weight, okay? So for your average YJ or LJ, TJ, most people can get away with semi-float, unless they're building them big. Once you go to a 40 or over, you should be on full float. You're just asking for trouble. And depending on where you wheel, if you live in like on the East Coast where you're wheeling in a lot of mud and you're like kind of banging off rocks and stuff, what happens is it'll bend the end of the drive shaft, and then your wheel's gonna wobble, where the full float hub has a lot more support and is typically beefier. So because it's so much bigger, that really gives it a lot more strength. Just like I was showing you before on the 30 spline versus the 40, the diameter, remember, the increase in diameter, whatever that is the square root times that difference is the amount of strength you just increased. So it's a lot. And the other day we just did it on, going from 1 3/4 to 2 inch on your roll cage, and it's twice the strength. Even though it's only a 1/4 inch, it's twice as strong. So just a little bit more in diameter really makes a big difference. Okay.
Michael Abdullah, 2006 LJ on 60s and 40s in the midst of LS swap
Okay.
with 4-liter 880E, not quite ready for an Atlas. Connecting to my NP231, beneficial to look for a Ruby T case or just save and run 231 until ready for Atlas or it blows.
So the 231 will last. I didn't know there was actually an adapter to go from the 4L80 to the 231. So if there is, I've never, as long as a 231 has oil, I've never seen one of those blow up. So they'll last for a long time. And remember, that's 272. So with that setup, I would be going with like a 3-to-1 Atlas. Now keep in mind, because you may be saying, well, Tony, 272 to 3.0 isn't much ratio. Why spend all that money? It's because you get the twin stick, right? So now you can shift just front, just rear, high, low. That selectability, if you've never had it, it's amazing. And again, I always encourage people, if you ever get a chance to go for a ride with me, I'll show you how beneficial that is. There's times when you can turn on a dime. Most recently, I was in Arizona out of Table Mesa with a group, and it was one of those things where once we got up to the top, there was nowhere to go, and I just disengaged the rear and was able to drive the front around and then pull right off. And you wouldn't believe the number of people that came over to me and said, "What did you just do? Like, how did you do that?" There are benefits to these things, and we don't just put them in because an Atlas is the cool buzzword. They have a function. So yeah, definitely if you can have somebody, and we've done it on Tech Talk. Alex and I stopped once, and I unloaded the Jeep, and I spun that thing around with just front drive to show everybody like how cool it is. So it's somewhere in the archives of our Tech Talks. Maybe like a year ago. Yeah, I think it was a year ago. So, okay, what else you got? We're down to like the last couple minutes.
Mike Stewart, 2015 two-door JK. A guy ran a stop sign and hit my front end, and I was wondering what to look for on Dana 30 as far as damage, and help, please.
Okay, so a good axle shop will actually be able to disassemble it. They run a bar through there, and they can tell if it's straight or not. They can also straighten the housing. So that's an option. Now, that's going to cost you probably $500. You could probably pick up a takeout front end for $200 from somebody. So I'm not sure how much I'd mess around with that and just go get another axle and throw it in there. The trick is, when you go to get another axle, there's a little tag on the front differential that tells you what the gear ratio is. Okay? So make note of what your gear ratio is, if it's a 373 or 355 or 411, and then make sure the one you go to buy has the same ratio, or the next time you put it in four-wheel drive, it's going to be ugly. Okay.
We have plenty of those in the yard.
Yeah. I don't know where you live, but we have plenty of those axles.
The graveyard.
Yeah.
Sam Walker, does this gear ratio chart account for overdriven top gears, or should this be measured in the direct driven transmission gear.
No, that does account for an overdrive gear. The green is for one overdrive gear, like what most people would have, a fifth gear.
Peter Doolin would like to know if you have any comments or input about Trail Hero.
Yeah, Peter's coming to Trail Hero with us. It's actually pretty exciting. We're all getting ready. I know Jamie and Jeff were here all weekend working on their Jeeps, and I've got the Aftershock just about ready to go. So it's a great event. There's tons and tons of wheeling. It's an open OHV area, so there's trails everywhere. We're going to be wheeling. I'm going to be giving rides. You know, we've got a whole bunch of GenRight people there. We're a big sponsor at this event. So we'll have a booth set up all week. It's easy to find the GenRight motorhome. We're doing a really nice, like over-the-top Jeep night on Friday of that week, which would be next week. And we do it at the golf resort. So there's a big grass area with a band, and we've got an off-road course, and there's food, and it's a pretty nice deal. So if you've never been to Sand Hollow before, there's a big lake there where they boat and do all kinds of stuff. People go swimming, and then there's the sand and rock section where everybody off-roads. So it's a whole recreation area. It's really, really nice. So if you've never been there, you should definitely check it out. You can see plenty of videos online. I've got 2 videos from there. I just did Slip Lock Gulch as part of the driver's seat, and I've also done Double Sammy as part of the driver's seat, where I've got Rich Klein riding with me, and he and I are going through the trail and talking about every obstacle and what to look for. And I think, you know, if you find this informative, you're going to love that video. So check it out. I think you'll like that. All right.
Okay, I think that about does it.
All right,
We're
we
5
are out of
after.
time.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will be back on Thursday. And by the way, next week, we will be coming to you live from Trail Hero on Tuesday and Thursday. So this Thursday, we're back here. And then, yeah, we're good to go. So thanks again. Have a good week till Thursday when we see you.